they're removed from the shelves. I think it's very much the same with brands. You have to remember that it's repetition.
Yeah. And sometimes it seems that it's like, so much competition in the marketing area, to get there. And you need to really create a change that will take sometimes, as you say, years. And I think that sometimes it's really hard to know if the brand is working or not, if you compare it to marketing, which is so obvious if it's working or not. So this is like a big gap between the strategy and the tactics, actually. So how can a
Exactly. Yeah.
company know that maybe it's not the right brand direction, or it is, and they should just wait?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because obviously what's going on in culture impacts our relationship with brands as well. Some brands do really well. And, like we were talking about Dove a minute ago, at the time it was revolutionary, but now it feels slightly different. But their core message about, real beauty is still relevant. It's just the way they're bringing it to life to the market is not resonating anymore. So the core idea of the brand is correct, but it's the marketing that's really not connecting. So I think you have to, in some ways, hold your nerve as well and just kind of keep trying new things. But your strategy should really be true to the brand itself. Your communications could be much more short term. So it's playing around with the marketing versus the brand strategy to see what works.
Yeah. So how do you uncover and research brand strategy?
So a lot of my background is ethnographic consumer research. So I do a lot of talking to people about how they feel about culture, how they feel about brands overall. So if we're working on a project for a client, we'll look at understanding culture. We'll look at understanding people, and then also looking at the category and seeing how that's evolving, what their competitors are doing, but also threats outside of their category they might not be thinking about yet, but are competing for attention with consumers. And the other thing we do when we're looking at researching brand strategy is making sure we're looking at the world of tomorrow, not just the world of today. So talking to leading edge consumers who are driving change and starting to behave in different ways. And then what we tend to do is go in with a very much exploratory mindset. So looking at what's going on in their lives, how they're interacting with the category, what their emotions are, and then exploring potential territories. So looking at statements, looking at emotions, what they think about the brand and the category overall. So we can really understand, okay, what's working and what's not. And if I give you an example for, one of my favorite projects for brand strategy, it was for Sunsilk, which is a hair care brand. So they do shampoos and conditioners. They're very big in Brazil, Indonesia, and India. And they really wanted to understand the emotions of younger women. So people who are 18, 19, 20, kind of going out into the world, looking for their first job, going off to university, kind of how they could connect to them and tap into their aspirations for themselves and understand really what was holding these women back from being their best selves. And that meant we needed to get to like really interesting emotions. So to do that, we got young women and their mums together, and we got them having conversations about their hopes and fears for each other. And what the mum had enabled the daughter to do, what the daughter was inspired from her mum. So we had mums and daughters all around the world crying in rooms together because they started having conversations with each other that they just don't ever have. About a Brazilian woman calling her mum the warrior, the path she forged. So it was really interesting to get to these emotions that we often don't say out loud, because that's really what the brand needs to tap onto and to kind of make part of its positioning. So those are really like powerful ways of doing it. And then we had a really interesting challenge a couple of years ago looking at helping Lego and their agencies understand play and what play means, but to kids. So can you imagine exploring a brand strategy with kids? It's pretty impossible. So we had to
Yeah.
get quite creative with, how do you even get kids to think about brands in an interesting way? So we had kids playing with Lego, showing us their creations, what they were making. We needed to go to countries where play is very different. So we were in China, we were in the US, we were in Brazil, looking at, okay, what is play about from a social perspective? What is society telling us about play? Is it valuable? Is it not valuable? What are parents telling their kids about play? And then what do kids themselves think? And it was fascinating because we had these ideas around, is Lego about making something perfect? You see the picture on the box and you're like, I've made the castle or the Millennium Falcon, and then I put it on a shelf and I leave it. Or is Lego about these box of amazing pieces that you can put together, make something, take it apart, put it together again, take it apart? So what we did was we created stories for children based around the idea of different positionings. And we had book cover each of the stories so that the kids could say, oh, this is the story I want to read and why. So we managed to have things like make, break, make as one story, you know, Dave the Builder as another one, like Chloe the Creator as another one. So we could see which positioning territories were the kids gravitating towards, which helped us understand where Lego might be able to play in its
Yeah.
evolving positioning. So that was a really interesting challenge.
Just because I'm interested, what's the difference between a Chinese kid playing and an American kid playing? Like,
But I
because it's
think,
a different
yeah,
way of thinking.
totally different. And I think it's really fascinating because a lot in China is about succeeding and doing something the right way. So you are about, here's the picture of the thing I am building and I'm going to make it, and then it is perfect and it goes on a shelf and I never play with it again. Versus when I grew up, Lego was very much like, here's a box, be creative, you know, make a pirate ship that's also a dinosaur. And, you know, and it's very different the way that kids are engaging with it. And it's also fascinating when you talk to kids about, you know, what is the value of play? Because a lot of society is telling